everyone, we are back with another Nancy Drew No Spoiler Reviews, and today we are going to be reviewing books 31 through 35. So if you guys enjoy these videos, please give me a thumbs up and leave some comments. It really helps my videos get seen by more people, and I would love to continue making these for more people to see. So this is where we left off in the last review for our orphan counter. And I also want to mention again that my Nancy Drew printable bingo cards are available for sale now on my Etsy shop. I will have links to these below. They really make the reading process more of like a fun kind of game experience, and I have really been enjoying playing my bingo cards as I'm reading these books. So if you want to play along, I do have these available for download on my Etsy shop. They are $4.99 and you get 32 unique Nancy Drew bingo cards to play. And you can print as many as you want. So starting off, the first book we have is number 31. This one is called The Ringmaster's Secret. This book was originally published in 1953 and the revised was published in 1974. So as always, the summary of this story is Nancy is given a beautiful golden bracelet and finds that one of the horse charms is missing. When she learns the unusual story behind the jewelry, she sets out to solve the fascinating mystery. The bracelet had been presented to a former circus performer by a queen who loved horses. For some reason, the performer had to sell the bracelet, but would not reveal her true identity. Clues lead Nancy to the Sims Circus, where she meets Lolita, an unhappy young aerialist who has a horse charm wrought exactly like those on Nancy's bracelet. The young detective joins the circus and is soon caught up in its exciting life. It becomes apparent that someone opposes Nancy's investigation and tries to deter her. Nancy's clever deductions help her to find the original owner of the bracelet, to reunite a mother and daughter who have been separated for years, and to bring much happiness to the Sims Circus. So as far as the orphans for this story, we do have a partial orphan. I'm starting to think maybe I shouldn't name who the orphans are if it makes like a difference to the story. So I will not name who the orphan is, but I think it's pretty obvious on this one. So we do have one partial orphan in the story. So as far as this book goes, I actually ranked this one 4 stars. I always love the kind of circus themes that show up from time to time in the Nancy Drew series. So the last few times that we kind of had some circusy things was of course in the Ivory Charm, Clue in the Old Album, and just a few little mentions throughout the series as well. So those are the 2 big ones that kind of have a little bit more of like a circus theme, but this one is definitely the circus book. As always, in every Nancy Drew book, Nancy has some incredible skill that helps her solve the mystery, and in this one she's actually learning to do stunt riding on horses, or they call it bareback riding. So she does all kinds of tricks like standing on the horse's back and riding around and doing jumps off them and onto them, all kinds of things like that. So that definitely comes in handy in this mystery with Nancy's investigation. And it's also explained that the bracelet comes from Nancy's Aunt Eloise, who gifted it to her. There is a funny part in this book. This is not a spoiler, but this was just a really quick mention that felt very uncharacteristically of Nancy, in my opinion. It seemed just something that didn't seem like something she would typically say. So the part that really kind of made me laugh, there is a part where Nancy's bracelet is in question and someone's asking if she's going to, you know, return it to the rightful owner. And Nancy's response is, quote, "Not unless it rightfully belongs to them. After all, Aunt Eloise gave me the lovely gift and it won't be easy to part with." So I thought that was just like a funny little part that was very real and very humanistic of Nancy, because of course, you know, if someone gives you a gift, you know, you expect it to be your gift, but it just seemed kind of a little unlike Nancy, just because she's always such a goody two-shoes, like, we'll help anyone, we'll give them anything. It just seemed a little funny in this one. She's like, well, it's my bracelet, I'm keeping it. So I thought that was just a really funny little minor detail that just really struck me as very un-Nancy-like. There is another part of this story that takes Nancy overseas to London, which is always fun, kind of having a bit of a change of scenery. And not only does Nancy join the circus, but she becomes a really big part of one of the circus acts in one of the performing troupes, and a lot is riding on Nancy, no pun intended. We also have another return of a Cinderella motif that we have seen before in The Clue in the Crumbling Wall. Now, to be honest, the Cinderella theme in that one was very minor and a little forced in my opinion. I feel like the Cinderella theme is a little bit more apparent in this story, which is always nice. You know, I'm a big fan of Disney, so I love any type of like fairy tale kind of theming along. So there is a Cinderella type storyline to this, which I thought fit the story a lot better than the previous mystery. And another thing that I thought was kind of funny, I actually was thinking one of the characters in the story, her name is Lolita, and I feel like that's a very uncommon name, but I was thinking, well, maybe they kind of got this name from the Vladimir Nabokov story called Lolita, but I actually checked and this story was actually published in 1953 and Vladimir Nabokov's I think was published in 1955, so I was like, oh, okay, guess they didn't get that name from that story. And of course, as far as my bingo card went, I got 2 5 across bingos in this one. It was really fun. I was so close to getting a 4-corner bingo. This one was actually a really good card. I got 2 full bingos out of this one. So overall, I really did like the story. I ranked it 4 stars. I thought it was a really fun, kind of romanticized view of the circus. As always, there's a lot of coincidental things that lead to certain clues, and I feel like this one had a really big jump in logic to help move the case along, which I'm still not quite sure how it came to be. It has to do with finding a specific person and how they came up with where to find them, so I think that one was a little bit of a leap in logic, but however, it is Nancy Drew, so it is what it is. Next up, we have book number 32. This one is called The Scarlet Slipper Mystery. This one was published in 1954 and the revised was published in 1974. And the summary for this one reads, Nancy meets Helene and Henri Fontaine, refugees from Centrovia who run a dancing school in River Heights. Strange circumstances have brought the brother and sister to the United States. When they receive an anonymous note threatening their lives, Nancy offers her help, but she encounters nothing but puzzles. Are the Fontaines involved with the Centrovian underground? Have they been threatened by their own countrymen? Why? Is a series of paintings by Henri Fontaine being used for a sinister purpose? Suddenly, the Fontaines disappear. Have they been kidnapped? Nancy and her friends pursue the trail relentlessly, even though danger lurks around every corner. They are trapped by their enemies and escape seems impossible. But Nancy's quick wit finally enables her to solve this intriguing and intricate mystery. We do have 2 orphans. This one's so obvious, it's Helene and Henri, so I'm just gonna come out and say that one. We have 2 orphans for this story. And in the story, we have another kind of foreign country type of story arc in this one. The last time we saw that was the clue in the jewel box, which was very reminiscent of the Anastasia story and very heavily implied that the queen from the foreign country was supposed to be like Russia or a Russian like type of country. So in this one, it's actually a fictitious foreign country called Centrovia, which is kind of very heavily inspired by, I would consider like an Eastern European type country. And we have a brother and sister duo that are fleeing their country, coming to River Heights to start a new life out of a revolution from their old country. So in the story, this one is very heavily ballet based, obviously. We see the brother and the sister duo owning a dance studio in River Heights, and they have to go into hiding. So Nancy and her friends step up to help keep the dance school running, to help keep their finances going. So they are teaching dance classes, they are doing all the administration work, all the while Nancy is trying to solve a mystery. It goes without saying, of course, Nancy is a star ballerina in this one. Her skills are just obviously uncapped, so we do see a lot of dancing in this story. And one thing that struck me that I thought was kind of interesting is we actually have a character name repeat, which I was kind of surprised. So in this story, there is a character named Mrs. Judson, which we have already seen a character named Mrs. Judson in, I believe it's book number 15, The Haunted Bridge. So I just thought that was kind of a funny plot point that they reused a character name already. Not quite sure why they did that. However, in this case, there are actually a lot of villains and there are a lot of aliases. So many to the point that I actually had to create a little flow chart for me to try to keep straight in the story who was who. And we have a lot of like double agents and triple agents, and someone's working with someone else behind someone's back, but then they're also working with this person. So I have to say it was a little bit convoluted with trying to remember who is who and all the characters, because they don't really give a whole lot of detailed descriptions of the characters. So it's really kind of like I'm picturing like a blank face and trying to keep straight like 5 different blank faces in my opinion. So that was one part that was was a little bit hard for me to follow. I just felt like there were too many villains working together with too many aliases to keep track of. There's another thing I noticed in this book that I started to see happening in other future books down the line, but they kind of do this thing where Nancy's trying to throw off bad guys off the case. So she'll do these unnecessary trips to nowhere just to throw them off. So she'll like take a plane somewhere and then drive back, which kind of seems extremely privileged and I don't know, just a little bit bizarre. And sometimes she'll even take a helicopter someplace, then take the train back, all kinds of things. So that is something I noticed that we will see a few more times in a few more books after this one. So just one of those things that it's just kind of like, Nancy really must have no limit on what she is spending, because obviously girlfriend can take a plane to another state and drive back and it's no big deal to her. Another minor non-spoiler detail we learned from the story is that Ned's middle name is Coleman. Kind of a funny, interesting little trivial fact that we learned in this book, but I always love learning any type of kind of like canon-like facts like that. So that was something we learned from this story. And this was another story, I couldn't remember if I had read this from my childhood or not, but there was this one kind of detailed plot line that kind of was the big reveal, and I couldn't remember what story it belonged to, but it definitely was this one. And once I got to that part, it just like kind of all lit up and I was like, oh, that was this story. So I had read this one as a child and I had vague memories from it. So the big reveal of this one, as far as like the treasure goes, since I already knew it, it was a little bit of a letdown, but I find that in my opinion, I think it was a very smart and very different type of reveal on the treasure, which I kind of liked. Some people I read in comments thought it was a little bit lame. I thought it was fun and interesting, so I kind of really enjoyed that plot point. So overall, I did give this one 3 stars. Again, I thought it was a really good book. It just wasn't my favorite as far as all the stories go, but this one definitely had a really like fun kind of spot in my heart because I did ballet for so long and I really enjoyed the story. Oh, and as far as the bingo card goes for this one, I did get 1 diagonal bingo, but I had like 5 different other ways. I was so close to getting a bingo. I was like 1 space off, but I did get 1 diagonal on that one. Next up, we have book number 33. This one is called The Witch Tree Symbol. This one was originally published in 1955 and the revised was published in 1975. All right, so the summary for this one reads, when a neighbor asks Nancy Drew to accompany her to an old uninhabited mansion, a new mystery opens up and danger lurks on the 2nd floor. Nancy finds a witch tree symbol that leads her to Pennsylvania Dutch country in pursuit of a cunning and ruthless thief. The friendly welcome the young detective and her friends Bess and George receive from the Amish people soon changes to hostility when it is rumored that Nancy is a witch. Superstition helps her adversary in his attempts to get her off his trail, but Nancy does not give up. Persistently, she uncovers one clue after another. Nancy's intelligence and sleuthing ability finally lead to the fascinating solution of this puzzling case. So we have no orphans in this story, and one thing that just kind of blew my mind is Nancy is described as blonde in this story. Now, I think in the original stories, she was originally blonde, and then they like changed her to be like a redhead, but this is one of the revised stories, and she is still called blonde, which I thought was very interesting considering her hair on the cover doesn't really seem to be that blonde. And I don't know why, but the cover art on this one, just like Nancy doesn't really look like her typical self. Like this doesn't really look like her in my opinion. So like the summary mentions, Nancy is going to the Amish country to track down who has stolen the furniture left to one of Nancy's neighbor who is asking her to work the case for her. And in the story, Nancy conveniently not only speaks French, but she also knows a little bit of German as well, which is very helpful with speaking with the Pennsylvania Dutch. So meanwhile, while Nancy is trying to track down the thief, she is also trying to track down a missing Amish girl whose family is wanting her to come back to their family. So that's kind of the 2 mystery plots of this story. So I found that the story kind of focused more on just like the everyday kind of Amish living, chores and activities and things like that. And the mystery was almost a little bit second place to that. So I found that the mystery just wasn't as, foremost in this story, but it was interesting to learn a little bit about the Amish community because I honestly don't really know very much at all. And I always hate when they do this, but this is another one of those stories where they kind of like catch the bad guys guys off the page and it's not really like an active kind of reveal and stuff like that. So I always kind of feel like that's a little bit of like a cop-out or a little bit of laziness to it. But overall, I only ranked this one 2 stars just because I feel like there wasn't a whole lot of mystery to it. It was interesting to learn, but I just felt like it wasn't very heavy on the mystery side. And as far as my bingo card, unfortunately, I did not bingo on this one, but I was very close. I was on a 2-way bingo that I needed. All I needed, and I can't believe it wasn't in the story. Well, I guess I kind of can, but all I needed was a telegram, and I would have had a 2-way bingo on this card. Go figures. Next up, we have book number 34, and this one is called The Hidden Window Mystery, and this one was originally published in 1956, and the revised text was published in 1975. I also want to note that this is actually the very last Nancy Drew book that has a revised version. Every book from here on out is an unrevised or just the original text, and boy, you guys, when we get to the next one, that is very apparent. All right, so the summary of this one reads, a magazine article offering a large reward to anyone who can find a missing medieval stained glass window intrigues Nancy. She asks Bess and George to join her on a search in Charlottesville, Virginia. Before the 3 friends leave River Heights, their adversary tries to get them to postpone the trip, but with no luck. Nancy is determined to carry through with her plans. During the girls' investigation of old southern mansions, they encounter a ghost who turns the tables and makes them disappear. Eerie sounds come from a beautiful estate that is surrounded by a high brick wall. Why will the owner allow no one to enter? How Nancy solves these mysteries and locates the stained glass window will keep the readers on edge for many hours. So in the story, we don't have any orphans, and I actually ranked this one 4 stars. I thought this was a really good story. It was another interesting one because it doesn't take place in River Heights, and I always kind of just enjoy the ones that take place in real life locations. So this one takes place in Charlottesville. So in the story, we have another repeat of an old, frail mailman who is kind of in trouble for supposedly misplacing or losing someone's mail that had money in it. Now, we saw this same exact plot line before in Nancy's Mysterious Letter. That was all the way back in, shoot, maybe like book 7 or 8. I think it might have been book 8. But it was like to the T, like an old retiring mailman losing someone's mail, happened to have money in it. So we kind of have another recycled plot line here. But in the story, Nancy discovers that there is a search for a missing stained glass window from the medieval period. So she happens to go to Charlottesville where her cousin lives, and she's staying with her trying to solve this mystery. This one has a lot of involvement of peacocks. Now, I don't know if this is true, but they say in this book that some people believe that peacocks are bad luck, and I didn't know if that was a true thing or not because I've never heard that before. So I thought that was an interesting thing. So if you guys have ever heard that peacocks are bad luck, let me know because I'm just not sure on that one. I don't know if it's made up for the story or if that is a true superstition that people believe. And we have a very heavily stained glass window motif in this one. That is, of course, what Nancy is searching for. And she even learns a little bit on how to make stained glass. And I thought that was very interesting because I have actually done stained glass making before, and it was a very fun process. So I actually really found this one interesting because I had some background knowledge in the stained glass window making process. So it definitely held my interest. Another funny thing, Nancy is actually described as being a reddish blonde in this story, whereas the last one, she was just straight up blonde. Now she's reddish blonde, not even Titian this time, which is kind of the signature description of Nancy. Blue-eyed Titian beauty is pretty much how she is always described. I also like in this one that we don't get too often is we do have a bit of a red herring as far as villains go. There is a character who is introduced and we're not quite sure what we're supposed to believe of this character. And I like that type of plot device in these Nancy Drew stories because so many of them kind of start out, especially with the last few, I would say 10 to 15 books I've read, we've had this reoccurring thing where Nancy will pinpoint the villain like from the beginning, and we're spending the entire story just like chasing after the villain and trying to catch up with him. And those, in my opinion, are not very interesting stories because I love the stories where we don't really know what's going on or who's doing what or maybe we have a few suspects, but one of them turns out to be innocent and this person actually is the true villain. Those I find are much more interesting because it gives a little bit more of a reveal moment, whereas we don't get too often in Nancy Drew books. So I always love when we have a good red herring character in the story. I do have to say there are a couple points in this book that I don't like. So we're going to Charlottesville, Virginia. So we've kind of got all these like old Southern mansions, and there always seems to be a little bit of like romanticizing of like slavery, not like straight up, but there'll be like a mention of some old slave quarters and someone would be like, oh, how charming. And it's just kind of like, really? Charming? I don't know if that's quite what I would call it. So we do see that just a little bit in this book, and whew, wait till we get to the next one. I did find a typo in this book. So there is a character, his name is Mr. Bradshaw. So on one line they have like his address posted and it says Mr. Bradshaw, and then in a couple lines below that and they have it spelled as Mr. Brashaw, and I just thought that was funny because I don't really find typos or errors like that too often in Nancy Drew books, but that was one I noticed, so I caught ya. So overall, I ranked this one 4 stars. I thought it was a very interesting book, especially with the stained glass making part of it. That was very interesting, and I thought this was a pretty good read. And you guys, as far as the bingo card, you guys, I was so close to like a 5-way bingo on this one. 5-way bingo. Unbelievable. So no bingo on this one, but I was this close. All right, and finally we have book number 35. This one is called The Haunted Showboat. This one was originally published in 1957, and like I mentioned earlier, there are no more revised texts. Now, when I was reading this one, I didn't realize that at the moment, and it is extremely obvious at this point that this is not a revised story. This one was a little bit hard to get through, so buckle up, you guys. This one also didn't have a summary, and I couldn't find the summary online, so I actually had to write my own. I did my best at trying to keep with like the tone of the Nancy Drew summaries, so please forgive me if this one sounds a little bit cheesy, but I did write this one myself. Bess and George invite Nancy on a trip to New Orleans during Mardi Gras to help their relatives solve a mystery involving restoring an old showboat called the River Princess. However, no one will go near it, fearing it is haunted by a ghost who plays calliope music in the dead of night. Before the mystery even begins, Nancy's beloved blue convertible is stolen in River Heights, along with her suitcase containing her only remaining belongings of her mother, a black lace shawl and an ivory fan. Meanwhile, in New Orleans, Nancy's case takes her around sightseeing through the old historic city with new friends, but can they all be trusted? Or is someone hiding their true intentions and driving the case off course? Nancy is determined to discover who or what is haunting the River Princess and for what purpose. Dangerous treks through the murky, mossy bayou takes Nancy and her friends on a thrilling discovery of what really goes on when the sun goes down on the bayou. So I hope my own summary kind of captured the essence of the story. We do not have any orphans in the story, but you guys, this one was very heavily laced with racist remarks, racism, stereotypes. This one was extremely hard, and when I was reading this book, I was like, what the hell is going on? I have not read any of the original Nancy Drew texts, which I know a lot of them also deal with those types of problems, and all the revised ones tend to try to clean that up a bit, but this is the original text, and there is no revised version, which blew my mind until halfway through the story I realized, oh, this was how the original story was, and there is no revised text. So this one definitely had a very different feeling to the text and the writing in the story compared to the other ones I have read, as they were all revised versions. Even some of them still having a few problematic languaging and terms and stuff. For the most part, it wasn't that bad, but this one, you guys, is... this one's hard. This one's hard. So we'll get to those parts in a little bit, but starting out in the story, this one kind of blew my mind, and this is a tiny spoiler, but it doesn't really throw off the case at all. But like I mentioned in the summary, Nancy's car is stolen, and within the first 23 pages, Nancy and her friends go through 3 cars in 23 pages. That blew my mind. There is a lot of wealth privilege in this story as well. So that was one thing that I was just like, how how far do we have to suspend our belief for this one? So this also takes place in New Orleans again. The last time we were in New Orleans was very briefly in the Ghost of Blackwood Hall. I wish that in the Nancy Drew stories they would like just make a reference of like being there before, since they were already there before, but in this one it kind of seems like this is the first time they've ever been there. And of course I know all the Nancy Drew books are supposed to be standalone, and you know, you don't have to read any of the other ones to even comprehend the story, which I think is great, but I wish they would throw in these teeny tiny like little one-liner things that harken back to other mysteries, like if the girls all got there and they just said something like, wow, it's great to be back in New Orleans, you know, just something that minute, I think would just really strengthen the mystery in itself. But you know, that is just a personal stylistic thing in my opinion. So in the story, Nancy, Bess, and George are going to New Orleans during Mardi Gras to help Bess and George's relatives investigate a haunted showboat that they are wanting to restore and fix up and bring out of the bayou. Meanwhile, Bess and George's cousin, Donna Mae, she has actually broken off her engagement and started a new engagement with a fellow, but everyone is a little bit suspicious of him. So another continuity thing that could be an error, probably not, but just in my opinion, it was kind of like an inconsistency, I will say. In the last story, it took place in April, and this one is supposed to be taking place during Mardi Gras. So I actually looked up what day Mardi Gras fell on in 1957 when this one was published, and that would have been March 5th. So that puts our storyline around the end of February, beginning of March as far as it goes. So I don't know if that's truly like a continuity error. So from the last few books, I was kind of like creating a timeline of how, when all of these would have logically taken place. So from my notes, I put that I wonder if this was the original story meant to go after the ski jump mystery, which took place at the end of December / the beginning of January. Then that would make this one taking place around like end of February, beginning of March. Then that makes the hidden window mystery take place around April. Velvet Mask was June and July. Witch Tree was August. And then that left Ringmaster and Scarlet Slipper as kind of like an unspecified time of year. So I just kind of felt like in the span of like the Nancy Drew timeline, that would have made much more sense as far as how the stories go out within this block of story. You know, were these just like some timelines that maybe they were working on this book and then they had to push it, so they just kind of jumped around? Or, you know, maybe it's not. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, because like I said, these were published originally once a year, so it wouldn't be that unheard of to believe that a year had passed in Nancy's time, considering Nancy is just perpetually 18 and never truly ages. So the one thing that I thought was huge in this book that we have not gotten a single time in all of the books up till now, so this is book 35, this is the first time we have like a true comment or mention of Nancy Drew's mom other than just her passing away when Nancy was young. Some stories they say she passed when Nancy was 3, some just say that she passed when Nancy was young. This is the first time we ever have like a true mention of Nancy's mom, and the fact that Hannah has found 2 items that used to belong to Mrs. Drew, which was of course the black lace shawl and the ivory fan, which Nancy wants to take with her to New Orleans, which coincidentally ends up getting stolen from the trunk of Nancy's car as her car is stolen. And I thought that was just a huge point, and I wish they would include more things like that. I hope in the future we will see these more little tiny nuggets of mentions of Nancy's family, of her mother, because that was one of the things that just kind of always blew my mind, how we don't really ever know anything about Nancy's mom. So that was a part that I really enjoyed, and I thought was a very heartwarming and touching plot device, and you know, thing that I really think drove the story a little bit more emotionally. Another thing I mentioned in my notes is that Bess and George have a lot of relatives that end up making cameos in the Nancy Drew series. So we've had in book number 5, Secret of Shadow Ranch, they're going to visit Bess and George's family in Arizona. We also have in The Sign of the Twisted Candles, we have Asa Sidney, who are the great uncles of Bess and George. In The Clue of the Leaning Chimney, we have Bess's cousin Dick Melton is in the story too. I'm not sure if he's related to George or if that would be on Bess's dad's side. I don't know, it's not specified. So now we have another set of aunt and uncle and cousin with Bess and George who live in New Orleans. So really quickly, I'm going to touch on just a few of the racial aspects in this book because you guys, this one is the most jarring of all the revised ones I've read. And of course, I haven't read the original text, which I do plan on going back and reading at some point because I do want to kind of understand the historical context of which the books were written. Of course, a lot of the revised ones kind of cleaned up a lot of that languaging, but I do want to, you know, see the true original forms as well. And so this one was the first, I guess, true original text that I've read of any of the Nancy Drew books. And you guys, this one's a little rough. None of these are really spoilers, and I'm going to try to speak delicately on these. So I just wanted to point these out in case that was just something you were wondering about or wanting to know. Let me refer to my notes on this one. Okay, so in some other Nancy Drew stories, it is kind of implied that some of the household staff are Black. Never really before in the revised stories have they ever been mentioned by skin tone or anything like that, but this one is very, very obvious that they have Black servants and they're in the South. And the servants are directly called Mammy, Matilda, and Pappy Cole. Now, if you're not familiar, Mammy and Pappy terminology was a very common racial post-slavery type of nicknames and stuff like that. And I don't know, it just kind of really rubbed me the wrong way hearing those types of terms, which were very racist in and of themselves, but they are very directly called that in the story. We also have several other explicitly stated people of color characters, and at this time they are constantly referred to as colored people, which again is not a term that we deem acceptable anymore. Typically people of color is used, and even sometimes that's problematic, so that is not my place to tell you what is or what is not appropriate, but that is some of the verbiage used in the story. We also have some descriptions of Black characters being referred to as Negro, which again is not my place to say whether that is appropriate or not appropriate. It just feels very dated. There was one quote that just kind of was like, ugh, little yikes for me. One of the characters is described as a white-haired Negro, and his face had the look of a trustworthy, helpful person. This is what he looks like, but he looks trustworthy. That kind of just feels like that thinly veiled racism, in my opinion. So that is also something that's in the book, as well as the dialogue of Black characters in the story is very hyper stereotyped with how things are pronounced and phonetically spelt out. There's a lot of very slangified Black accent dialogue in the story as well that felt a little bit strange and uncomfortable in my opinion. It just seemed a little unnecessary, and it was going too far to tokenize these characters with the way that they spoke and how they use that to contrast against the speech of the white characters and the speech of the Black characters. So that was another kind of hard one to get through. And then there was also a lot of talk of like past slavery and things that go along with the storyline. So just be aware, this one is not the most PC of stories. Getting back to a little bit more of the story, there are some mentions of some restaurants that the groups go to visit during the story, and I actually am very happy to say that these are true, real restaurants, and they're actually still in operation today, which I thought was very interesting. The two restaurants that are named in the story is, one is called Broussard or Broussard's, and the other one is called Antoine's, which are still in operation today, so I thought that was very interesting. Also in the story, there was supposed to be like a Sleeping Beauty motif in this one, however, that was not there at all. It was mentioned that in the beginning of the story they're putting on a play themed by Sleeping Beauty. However, we don't ever get to see any of that in the story, so I thought it was just kind of a little bit of a moot point that I either would have liked to have been more included in the story. At one point they go like costume shopping for the said play, but we never actually get to see the play in the story, so it would have been interesting if they had included just, you know, like a paragraph to that. So overall in the story, aside from all the racial aspects of this book, the story itself, I found the mystery very interesting. I really loved the setting of it. And this one had a really rich kind of feeling and environment to it, aside from all of the racist, stereotypical aspects of this book. If it didn't have all that and it was a little bit cleaner on that part of it, I would have ranked this a 5-star book because I just really enjoyed the entire atmosphere of it, the mystery of it, and just the overall feel of it that I had while I was reading this one. I really enjoyed it, but I'm ranking this one 4 stars just because I can't really totally give it 5 stars based on all of that problematic aspects of the book. And as far as the bingo goes, I did not bingo on this card. I got really close though. I almost got 2 different bingos on here, but unfortunately no bingo this time. All right guys, so that is it for this group of Nancy Drew no spoiler reviews. I really hope you guys have been enjoying these videos. If you have, please give it a thumbs up and drop me a comment below. I love hearing you guys' feedback of what you think of these stories, if you've read them, if you are interested in reading them. It makes a big difference on my channel with the engagement, and I love making these videos so much, and I wish more people would see them as well. So if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. You can follow me on Instagram, link is below, and until my next video, I will talk to you